Hey tubers, so for this video I'm just going to go through a few of the tips. This is not intended to be an all-inclusive how to change shocks on a C5 Corvette. There's all kinds of videos on how to jack up your Corvette correctly. There's all kinds of videos on changing the shocks. My intentions on this video is to give some of the tips that I didn't see on other YouTube videos, and also to prove that you do not need to disassemble any part of the suspension other than the shock bolts themselves. Using zip ties, you can compress the shock and manipulate it out without detaching any part of the suspension. So with that, let's go into the video. Hey tubers, how you doing? So my whole purpose in this video is to show that you can remove the front and replace the front shocks on a C5 Corvette without taking off any of the suspension. No ball joints, nothing. It's not that difficult if you follow certain procedures. I learned a lot from other videos, but no one completely showed how you finagle the shock out. So let's do that. Mine happened to be the magnetic control ride, so I do have the clip on the upper part of the shock to play with. So it's not that difficult. In fact, a lot of the videos show removing reservoir tanks up in the engine compartment. Not necessary. It can all be done from below. So let's get to it. So far so good. The only problem is getting this nut off here without accessing the top. I think it's going to be possible, but the problem is that the center rod here keeps twisting. I don't know if you can see it on this one. It keeps twisting as I'm trying to undo the nut. So what I'm going to do is cut the boot. Cut the boot off, and I'm going to put vice grips on this. Obviously you wouldn't want to do that on the new shock, but on this one it'll work. Pop this down now. Need a screwdriver. There it goes. And the shock's so old it's easily compressed. Okay, now I'm going to take out the bottom bolts. Okay, so once you get the top bolt undone and the bottom bolts undone, if your shock doesn't have a whole lot of life, it's just pretty easy to compress and should pop right out. Probably a couple ways to take it out, but it's not that difficult. Okay, so the old shock came out pretty easily because it's easily compressed. It doesn't take much. The new shocks, however, as you would expect, are a little bit more to compress it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to try and configure some zip ties. Put one there. On top of the grommet, or the here, something like that. I used 24-inch zip ties that I purchased at Harbor Freight. I think they were $2.39 for a package of 10 of them. this ready. Now we're going to compress the shock. And try and with one hand, how easily this is going to be done. I don't know, my zip tie is long enough. It's not. My zip tie is not long enough. So, what do you do there? You extend it. Okay. Didn't need this big of a zip tie for this part, but it's all right. So it goes on top here. This gets threaded through here. Alrighty, go ahead. Start zipping it. Okay, compress our shock. Another hand would be good here. All right, that shock is fully compressed. Okay, so the old one came out right through here, so this should fit in nicely right here. And what do you know it does? I'm going to get the bottom bolts on here. Okay, I'm just going to get them snug. We'll torque them after I get the shock in place. So that's in place. Now I can just cut this and release it into its position. Okay. Goes. So I just cut the zip ties. Sorry I didn't get that on the camera. Here's what's left of the zip ties here. Cut it off the bottom, and the shock goes right into place there. Okay, so I got the shock compressed by putting a jack under the suspension here. I got it up. Probably could go up a little bit more, but I think this is going to be sufficient. And then now I just zip tied it so that it stays compressed. So up here I've got it zip tied, two zip ties, one around the collar, if you will, and then down below here it just goes around, if you can see it in there, just goes around that the bottom part of the shock. So to be perfectly honest, I struggled for probably at least half an hour or more on just the one rear shock. It was a pistol. Raising up the lower control arm there is good. It does compress the shock somewhat, but what I had to end up doing was get a screwdriver in there and pry the shock up from the bottom to compress it even more. And then with the zip ties on it, as I compressed it, I would increase the tension on the zip ties. So eventually I got it to the point where it was compressed. There was still a lot of life in the rear shocks, so it was not as easy as the front shocks to compress. But you really do need to compress it as absolutely far as you can in order to shorten the shock, and then you can manipulate it out. Okay, I got the bottom bolt in. And you can see here the shock is still compressed. Let's see if I can get this here. So now what I want to do is, before I let it go, is I'd like to get the clip on. And I don't know if it'll stretch that far. I got to decompress it a little bit. Let's see, how is the best way to do this? I don't want to. I wish there were a way to slowly decompress it. There's got to be a way to do that without. Once I cut the zip ties, it's just going to go. Let me think about that. So if you don't have magnetic ride, that's not a problem. Just cut the zip ties and let it fly. But if you've got that clip for the magnetic ride, what I ended up doing is I put an additional zip tie on there, a looser one, cut the taut one, and then released it so that it got a little bit closer, but not fully extended. And then I was able to put the clip on. So I ran out of time videoing, sorry, but I hope I showed you enough. Again, my whole intentions in doing this video was to prove that you could do it without disassembling any of the suspension other than, of course, the shock. So it works. It's a little bit tedious, but I'd much rather do it that way than you know, start removing control arms. If the video was any use to you, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. That'd be great. And thanks again for watching.